What's up? Welcome in. It's that time. It's Thursday morning, probably afternoon, whatever. It's the Sooners on SI podcast, episode 249, and it's Tulane week. I know you're all juiced. I'm Ryan Chapman, hanging out here and more. We've got the big boss man in the 918, the great John Hoover. Boss, how are we?
Doing good, man. Just trying to avoid Dr. Death.
The Oklahoma Stampede is running wild on the practice field. We'll talk about what that all means here in a little bit. We've also got our guy Randall Sweet in OKC. Randall, are you dodging the new demolition plans for Prairie Surf / Cox / the Mirror, all that stuff?
Yes, managing to stay out of the construction zones there, but it is exciting to see some big changes coming to downtown OKC. New stadium starting down there.
Yeah, 2028. Get your renderings fired up, people. Or just give me like good concession options. That's all I want. It is the Sooners on SI podcast, and this football team, much like all of Oklahoma City, is under major construction. Guys, before we open it up, it's been I feel on one hand a pretty quiet and expected week, is basically the offense sucks and everyone's trying to figure out what to do with it. That's the vibe. But it was kind of a weird, fiery at times Brent Venables press conference. I thought before we dive into the week and trying to fix it up, Hoove, you are manned with our big rewatch. And typically I also, by the time we meet on a Thursday, we've watched the game live once. I usually watch it back on Sunday and then watch it back again on Tuesday. I'm just going to peel back the curtain. Our family rolls with DirecTV, so I can't get the SC Network watch back. There's not been a YouTube copy, which usually I watch the YouTube copy, and I just don't care enough to do a free trial for Fubo or YouTube TV that is going to be totally superfluous here in a couple of weeks when DirecTV eventually figures it out. So I've not watched the game back. I'm just going off vibes and what I remember from that fateful night in Norman. Who, when you look back in, did you get any closer to filling up the suggestion box for Seth Luttrell, Brent Venables, and Bill Beanbo on how to get this thing fixed?
From me, no. But yes, the fans have certainly filled up the suggestion box. I don't have very many suggestions other than I said it during, was it? I think it was on a comment, on a reply to a comment on the YouTube channel. Might have been on the blog, but at some point last week, I said, OU needs to stop trying to fit round pegs into square holes. And Brent Venables used that analogy in his press conference. Thank you, Brent, for watching, for reading, for listening, whatever it is that you do. He's right. During the rewatch on Sunday evening is when I watched it. Had the Rams game kind of simulcasting on one and the Sooners game on my tablet. By the way, I still have DirecTV. I haven't canceled them yet. I also have Fubo, and I also have YouTube TV, and I also have Hulu. What the hell is wrong with me? I'm spending money on all these broadcast things. Listen,
Hoove is collecting the streaming infinity stones. He's like, I'm almost there. Hoove is inevitable.
I'm almost inevitable. So basically my takeaway on the rewatch was there's too many players doing things that are not their strength. Gavin Sawchuk, for instance, looks like a dive fullback from the 80s. On the plays that he's getting that little inside zone scheme, and he's squeezing it in there for a yard. Dude's got pretty elite speed for a college running back. Probably need to get him going somewhere on the edge at least. Maybe try that. Javante Barnes is a little more physical, and what do we see him doing? Right? Mm-hmm. We see him on the edge trying to outrun guys. He's not the fastest guy, but he's more physical. You don't see a lot of – you see some, but not a lot of north-south runs with him. Jackson Arnold, pretty quick. You'd like to see maybe some misdirection. If you're going to run him, you'd like to see some misdirection. You'd like to see some surprise. Not like 3rd and 10 quarterback draw. That was weird, to set up a field goal, to try to get to a 4th and 2, and maybe you go for it, or maybe you kick it. I thought that was weird. You're seeing a lot of underneath stuff to Brennan Thompson, who could be in the Olympics as a 4x100 guy. Why would you try to get him going underneath? He's a slight guy. He's small. He's not the most physical. So putting him in a place where he's going to take punishment before immediately after catching the football and possibly lay the football on the ground. It's just not the best thing. And then I think we've seen guys, correct me if I'm wrong, Deion Burks has been unleashed on one semi-deep ball, and he ran the wrong route, or he ran an incorrect route, and the ball was intercepted. Am I wrong about that? Has there been more deep balls to Deion Burks? Because a lot of those deep balls have been to Zion Reagans, and they're missing guys on the sidelines.
Yeah, they've run him out there for one or two more that the ball didn't get thrown. I think that it all stems back to the old football adage of if Oklahoma could run the football somewhat effectively, it would help a lot of stuff out.
Yeah.
And that comes to why are you having to get Brennan Thompson and Deion Burks going exclusively underneath? Well, because neither Temple nor Houston, which are not good defenses, they're not going to hang their hat on stopping the run. Neither one of those defenses had to come out of any kind of too high look, or it felt like Temple was running 3 high at some point. Just because they said, we don't think OU can punish us up front, so we're going to not let the track stars run behind. And I thought Houston, that was even more pronounced when your wide receiver rotation was mostly Deion Burks, Brendan Thompson, Zion Reagans, who are all very small guys. Now, Burks is muscular as all get out, all that stuff. He's a physical guy, but Brendan Thompson's not that guy right now. And Reagans he's going to take a couple of years to get as built as a guy like Burks. That's something that I know that we don't think of Jalil Farouk as the biggest guy in the world, but he was still 6'1", 215 and physical, a good blocker, which Randall kind of led me to my other thing is if you can't run the ball, then you've got to find a way. How do you get Jackson Arnold into any kind of rhythm? That's whether you're a veteran quarterback or a young quarterback. We hear offensive coordinators all the time talk about, is there a way that you can get 4 or 5 layups to start a game? And when you look at it, if they can't run the football, and that's been compounded by Jackson Arnold not being perfect reading the defense when he's got RPOs, then you go, okay, well, you're not able to send guys deep because there's a couple of safeties hanging out there. And we're like, okay, so now I want to get swing pass. I want something behind the line of scrimmage, maybe a wide receiver screen, something that could maybe make some guys run after catch, get 10 yards down the field, even though you only threw it a couple yards. Well, the guys that are out there blocking are Deion Burks, Brennan Thompson, Zion Reagans. They're going to get blown up by a pretty physical, though not good, Houston secondary. And I think it would send off alarms to any defense in the world right now if you see suddenly Jake Roberts roll out there and Deion Burks is lined up behind him. I don't know anything about defense, and my first thought would be, I think they're going to try and have Jake Roberts block for this really fast guy who we. So Randall, that kind of, I think everything plays into their inability to run means that how do you get easy stuff when you become pretty simple to defend, regardless of the fact that Oklahoma on paper should have way better athletes than Temple and Houston and Tulane.
You know, you mentioned the blocking out there on the perimeter. I think that's where you really, really miss guys like Nick Anderson and Jaden Gibson, because those guys are huge, big-bodied guys with really, really long arms. It's hard for defensive backs to get away from those guys when they engage. So not having those guys out there really, really hurts Oklahoma. Of course, you know, if Nick Anderson is able to play this week against Tulane, then that'll help Jackson Arnold a lot. Those two seem to have some chemistry. Going back to the Alamo Bowl last year, of course. You know, Nick Anderson kind of started last year as a second-team receiver, so got some reps with Jackson Arnold when both of those guys were on the second team. And then again, just his talent, it seems like that would probably be a helpful addition back. But you mentioned, you know, with the injuries at the receiver position, it's hard to get a lot of those guys who are effective in the short range because, you know, like we mentioned, Zion Reagans, Brendan Thompson, those guys are really deep threat guys. That's really where their skill set lies. And that's just, I think, too predictable at this point. You know, we saw the best Oklahoma's passing offense looked last week was whenever they were going short over the middle to Deion Burks. You know, Jackson Arnold was able to find him on a few slant routes, picked up a few first downs that way. But really, that was the only thing that was consistently working on offense for Oklahoma. So if you're able to maybe run a few different schemes this week, try to you know, get those running backs loose, like you mentioned. Like I think Hoover mentioned, maybe getting Sawchuk on some more of these outside zones, maybe throwing him some of those swing passes and letting Javonte Barnes run through the middle of the defense. You know, if Nick Anderson coming back in the offense can help loosen things up. But I think really what you've got to try to do if you're Seth Luttrell and company is just, again, it sounds cliche. It's something you hear all the time. Find easy completions for Jackson Arnold. Get 4 or 5 yards and don't get behind the sticks. That's the number one thing. If you can get those 4 or 5 yards on first down, that's a huge help to the rest of the drive, because then you're not behind the sticks trying to play catch up the rest of the time.
It'll be interesting. I'd say I haven't gotten like counted, but 85% plus of all the questions this week fielded have been about the offense. And for good reason. It's been kind of a tire fire in the first 2 weeks. Now we enter what I'm calling this the Rogue One portion of the podcast because rebellions are built on hope. That's what we know from Rogue One. And right now for Oklahoma, getting this offense better, Brent Venables used the word hopeful a lot this week. He used the word hopeful when it came to Branson Hickman's health, the center. He used the word hopeful when it came to Jake Taylor's health, the right tackle. Wednesday on the SEC teleconference, Brent Venables said that Nick Anderson was able to practice on Tuesday, do some team stuff. They're hopeful, again, that Nick Anderson can get back in. I really do believe getting Nick Anderson back will be a big boost for Jackson Arnold, because then that would give him two weapons in Deion Burks and Nick Anderson that he trusts. But if we go, Garen Hatchett's out for the year as well, by the way. I think that week one more and more looked like they knew he had the torn bicep. They wanted to roll him out there and see what he could do with it. It was clear he was getting targeted by Temple, and so they're going to have to shut him down for the year. That was announced on the coach show on Monday. That kind of runs through this week's stuff. So from there, I would be kind of shocked to see Branson Hickman play on Saturday. That would be a very short turnaround timeline for the high ankle sprain. It feels like Jake Taylor started that game hurt, and then I know there's a lot of speculation on did he take a shot to the ribs or something like that, because he was really lumbered by the end of that. If it's as simple, John, as Oklahoma's offensive line on Saturday being the group that closed that game against Houston, where you got Logan Howland at left tackle, Sexton, Bates, Wee-Woo, Tarquin. That's your group left to right. I do think they got better in pass protection from week one to week two, boss. Is there a world in which Bill Bedenbaugh is just getting back to work and making the most of all 20 of these hours that they get to practice and do film and all that stuff this week, that you can see an inexperienced group actually get better from week 2 to week 3 going into this Tulane game?
Yeah, Logan Howland's inexperience at left tackle would be concerning, I would think. But what are your alternatives? You want to, the word is Jacob Sexton has been the best on the left side, and he's flexible enough to play guard or tackle. He's probably your best left tackle. He doesn't have any great experience there. He doesn't have a vast library of volumes of things that he can draw from. He's green too. Tarquin is your most experienced left tackle. He's having to play right now, we think. We'll see on Saturday when they roll him out there. So, yeah, I don't know. To me, it all starts with Branson Hickman. If you get him back and he's healthy and he's effective, he's still stepping up. Remember, he's a guy that played in the American Athletic Conference, and now starting next week, he's going to have to play in the SEC. So if he's healthy, if he's good to go, if he's 100%, he still never played on a week-to-week basis against the SEC. None of these guys have. But what you mentioned last week during the game, Fabechi Wee-Woo was like he was in a turnstile at times. There were people, going to his left and going to his right, and he's chasing him. He's trying to push him away. He's not engaging. He's not blocking. I think what we heard on Tuesday from Brent Venables is freshman Eddie Pierre-Louis may be a guy that is getting himself into that track where Caden Green was last year, where, he gets a little more reps, he gets a little more pretty soon. By midseason, he's starting. That's a possibility. But again, if your best solution lies 2 or 3 weeks away with a freshman coming in and starting on the offensive line, I think that's a further indictment on the recruiting, the development, the talent, the transfer portal effectiveness, all that stuff, that it has not been good. Has not been good since last year, since those guys left last year.
Yeah, and Randall, just real quick before you hop in, this is something that we talked about in the offseason. I don't know if we beat a dead horse or by any means, but go back and look. 2021 recruiting class for Oklahoma. Lincoln Riley was the head coach, so Bill Bedenbaugh had different marching orders from above, but Oklahoma signed 2 offensive linemen. 1, 2. Savion Byrd, Cullen Montgomery. That bust. That entire class is a bust class for Oklahoma along the offensive line, seeing as neither one of those guys are factoring into starting at Oklahoma. Neither of those guys are playing at Oklahoma, right? You look at the 2022 recruiting class. Jacob Sexton, Jake Taylor. When healthy, both those guys would be starting, but you only sign 2 offensive linemen, much like we're seeing, I think, with college basketball, especially. I know we're gonna wire off here and I'll come back. You look at what K-State did and what Jerome Tang did. His first group, he had a couple of guys that stayed, but mostly a portal class, Elite Eight, big run through. It was awesome. The next year, big time portal class, throwing money all over the place. That group didn't come together. K-State was a disaster compared to what they were 2 years ago. It feels like Bill Bedenbaugh has had to live and die by the portal a little bit because that's what Lincoln Riley and that was their MO. They were going to only take the guys they truly believed in and backfill with the portal. Bill Bedenbaugh for 3 or 4 years has had to backfill with the portal, and it's worked. Except for now, when you have this plague of injuries across this offensive line, the only guys that you're talking about for Oklahoma to have had big depth that's rolled through is a Hito Zeta, a Logan Howland, who is a converted tight end. Not that those guys aren't going to be great players in 2 or 3 years, but for right now, those guys are not ready to roll out and play against Tennessee next week. And that's just what you get. Now you're in the same boat with this group of freshmen of putting a massive pressure on Eddie Pierre-Louis and Eugene Brooks to come in and as true freshmen make a difference on a team in the SEC. And Randall, that is what Brent Venables is trying to change, and it should change because, again, it's just a numbers game of what Oklahoma is taking as far as the classes they're signing and all that stuff. But as of right now, it is huge headache for Oklahoma and Bill Bedenbaugh because it finally hasn't all come back together and come to roost with that offensive line.
I think that's why in these past 2 classes, you've seen Oklahoma go so hard after, getting those numbers in the offensive line class. In the 2023 class, Oklahoma brought in 5 offensive linemen, and there was a really big effort there to get all of those guys in the class, even offering some of the in-state prospect, or I guess Josh Isosa's in the 2024 class, but the same thing in the 2024 class, I had the years confused. The 2024 class, Oklahoma added 5 offensive linemen in that class, including Josh Isosa, an in-state guy who under Lincoln Riley might not have gotten an offer from Oklahoma. And, I think that goes to show, like you mentioned, Bill Bedenbaugh is trying to fill those numbers, trying to get bodies, trying to see who he can put out there, just getting the depth on the team. Again, in the 2025 class, I think Oklahoma sits at 4 offensive linemen right now. That includes, we've talked at length about the 2 elite tackles. They've got 2 interior guys in that class. So just in the past 2 classes alone, you're bringing in 9 new offensive linemen. I think to have the competitive depth that Brent Venables and company want in the offensive line room, especially in the SEC, when you're going to be playing physical defensive lines every week, you're going to have guys get hurt. If you want to have that depth, that's how it needs to be every year. You have to be bringing in 4 or 5 good, talented offensive linemen that you really think are going to be able to play in a few years. And of course, we hear all the time about how great a development Bill Bedenbaugh is. If you have guys who've been in the system for 2 or 3 years, they will have the time to be developed. But right now, I think what we're seeing is a lot of guys, whether they're transfers or young guys who have only been under Bill Bedenbaugh for a year, 2 years. And it's really hard for those guys, especially the younger ones, to step in and, like you said, play against SEC competition, which they haven't even seen yet. So I think, Hoover mentioned, getting Branson Hickman back. I think that's going to be a huge help for the current offensive line, obviously. Josh Bates is the 4th string center, which is, kind of crazy. I think that's it's pretty telling about what Oklahoma thinks of him, that he's their 4th center. I mean, Garen Hatchett played guard at Washington, and they brought him in, and still played him over Josh Bates. I think that shows what Oklahoma thinks about where Josh Bates is at right now. So I think that getting Branson Hickman back, the guy who's supposed to be that starter, is going to be a huge step up from where you're at there. And then you have to hope that a guy like Logan Howland, guys like Eddie Pierre-Louis, some of these young guys that are more raw, that have less experience, can really learn quickly, really pick up the offense and the physicality of playing in the SEC quickly. I mean, obviously, we've heard that Eddie Pierre-Louis is an elite athlete. Logan Howland, again, moved from tight end to tackle. Usually those guys have pretty good footwork. So there's some skills there that are positive. But Ryan, you mentioned it. Those guys don't seem like they're ready to hold up against, what Oklahoma has to face right now. And again, the cohesion part of it is a factor too. Brent Venables, I think, mentioned that in the press conference yesterday, saying that, getting these guys reps together is important. And the more you're shuffling them around, the more you're trying to find who's going to be that starting 5, the less reps that they can get together.
Yeah, I just wonder too. It's something that I don't know if it's something I'd love to ask Bill Bedenbaugh. I don't know if Brent Venables has this dialed in of a conversation with Bill Bedenbaugh, other than just, hey, Bill, Seth, who are you guys rolling out there? But I would really love to know if you had Branson Hickman healthy at center, would Oklahoma be more willing to play younger guys at guard, Heath Ozeta, Eddie Pierre-Louis? Because we've heard kind of a buzzword from Monday night when we talked with Josh Bates and Logan Hallam was a little bit of communication's got to be better. Clearly, the assignments were not sound, especially in the run game. That's how you ended up in the passing game too, with Fabechi and Bates getting split a bunch of times. So it'll be interesting to see what that looks like because, Randall, we know that Eddie Pierre-Louis couldn't come in the spring because of just how Tampa Catholic is set up. It's not a thing on Eddie or anything like that. But we've heard so much about Eddie Pierre-Louis. I know you've written about him a couple of times that I wonder if Branson Hickman was the starting center, if Sexton would be at left tackle and Pierre would be at left guard, even for just a drive or two, just to see what that thing looks like.
Yep. And I think, the point that I really wanted to make there is I think that's Oklahoma's best chance on the offensive line, really is. I mean, Jacob Sexton is a tackle. You watch him play. You don't even have to watch him play, honestly. Look at his body type. That is the body type of a tackle. He's a huge, huge guy with really, really long arms. Those guys play really well at tackle. It's hard for those guys to bend and play on the interior because they'll get grabbed. Again, you're being so tall, it's hard for the quarterback to play around those guys. But on the edge, the long arms, he can kick out and bend. Again, if you watch him play, he's clearly a tackle. He plays well in space. He's not getting them the opportunity to play much in space when he's playing guard. So if you want to put Jacob Sexton at his best, he needs to be playing tackle. And again, I think the world of Logan Howland. I think that he's going to be a really good player eventually. I'm a really big fan of him as a football player, the skill set he has, but I do think that he needs time. I think that's clear. And so if you can bump him back down, get him some more time, and you can put Sexton there, you can get a guy like Eddie Pierre-Louis who might be more ready to play immediately. That, I think, is the best chance for Oklahoma's offensive line this season.
You wanted to hopium. This was not the week for you as an Oklahoma fan. It kind of, it is what it is. Brent Venables didn't make excuses for the injuries. He just laid out, like, this is why Oklahoma's in the situation that they're in. Saturday night after the game, Brent Venables did say that him and Seth Luttrell, they'll be reevaluating everything. Boss, on Tuesday, you circled back through and basically had for Brent, okay, you said you were going to reevaluate stuff. Now that you've reevaluated, what's Oklahoma doing this week to work with the fact that this is probably the offensive line that they're going to have to roll with, at least for this week? They hope they get Hickman back. That's more likely for Tennessee. How are they going to change this thing to be a lot better, to be a lot more efficient against Tulane?
Yeah, I was, in the context of what college football is, and from our perspective, we cover the game from beyond, from outside the Switzer Center, obviously. So we have, as writers, we have a very regimented schedule. On Monday, we do this, and on Tuesday, we do that, and on Wednesday and on Thursday. It's very specific what we do to cover the team. It's also very specific what Brent Venables does as a head coach to cover to coach the team, right? On Sunday, he does this. And on Monday, his regiment says do this. And on Tuesday, they do this. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, all the way to Saturday. The walkthroughs look the same. The practices look the same. The film studies look the same. So the problem is you need to improve. You need to do what you're doing much better, right? Tulane's coming to town. Tennessee's coming to town. The SEC is coming to town. So you need to be better at what it is that you do. Now, given the restrictions of the regiment, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, everything's set. That was my question to Brent on Tuesday. Improvement implies change, right? If you're going to improve on something, that means you're going to change the way you do it. You're not just going to keep doing it and doing it and doing it, hoping you get it better. But so my question, Brent, was given that full scope, what changes do you anticipate making this week? And he said, he immediately was like, this sounds like a typical Hoover question. He said, what are your changes? Is that a loaded question? And I said, no. You said on Saturday you need to reevaluate a lot of things, right? He said, I didn't say change, but you did. So I'm asking you, what does that mean? And I said, okay, let's talk about it. You're going to change the process that you do, that you approach this with at any point during the week. Are you going to give Jackson Arnold more on his plate? Are you going to give the offensive line less on their plate? Are you going to make changes to the structure so you can thereby improve? And that's when he went into what you called, Ryan, maybe the most insightful answer of the week. He said, maybe we're going to do some things to get more good on good work. What? Wow. They're going to change the structure of practice to get more good on good. I couldn't believe I got that answer out of him. That's incredible. And that's not the most necessarily revealing thing, but coaches don't go down that path with reporters typically, and certainly Brent has been very reticent to do that with us in his 2+ seasons. So he talked about all kinds of other ways, including he did say that getting more competitive, having more good on good in practice opens you up to, he says, you're a little more vulnerable to getting banged up. And that is the absolute last thing this team needs, especially on offense, right? So there's he talked about getting the play sheet, getting better at finding plays on the play sheet, the call sheet. Some of it might be, here's the quote, are we getting to our plays calls on the call sheet? And then he said, not trying to fit a square peg get through a round circle. He said, or maybe we get better at doing the basics. How do we execute this play? Okay, they have a specific play. Let's say it's the interception. They have a specific play that Deion Burks runs the deep post, and instead of trailing deep to the post, he cuts back under. They need to execute better. They need to do the fundamentals of certain plays better, because that one got away from them, turned into an interception. He said that they need to go back and look at things that they've been doing good for a long time. How do we get better at those? And he said, to me, it's doing it over and over and over until you can't get it wrong. That's what practice is all about. And then he went into several different players, and talked about some of the things that they could do better. How do you get them more reps? And you only have 20 hours a week, film room walkthroughs. So it's a tangled mess that he's got to sort through as the head coach, because he's got multiple positions where you've got multiple players out with injury, young and inexperienced, need to get better, all that stuff. And he's got to put the best product on the field. And shoot, guys, I guess that's why he makes $7.5 million. I was
about to say, that's why he makes the big bucks. That's why Beanbo has gotten raised over raised. I think if you slap two answers together, which is sometimes kind of dangerous to do, but George Stoya asked, hey, Brent, you were at Clemson when you were breaking in a really young quarterback in Trevor Lawrence. You weren't the head coach, but what are some of the things you saw those guys do? And Brent Venables smiled and said there were a lot of guys with experience around him, which if you want to read between the lines, to me, that said, Brent Venables said, it wasn't all on Trevor, and this is a lot on Jackson Arnold. To me, is what that answer meant, is that he has no experience around him, which is why I think you get into the answer to your question, Hoover, where he talks about having to go with a little more good on good, because I think it's been pretty clear that maybe this offensive line, the young pieces, can handle what's getting thrown at them when it comes to the scout team guys. And then when you get into some defensive linemen actually going game speed, that's where either mentally they're getting so freaked out because the game hasn't slowed down for them yet that they're missing assignments, or they're just flat out getting blown off the football, which is bad news considering that you thought that was bad against Temple and Houston's defensive line. Wait until James Pierce and that crew roll in next weekend. Oklahoma might lose by 50 if they play like that, and that's not really an exaggeration. Randall, real quick before we dive into some of the other quotes and stuff, this is what this week stands out to me. Jackson Arnold had one to the Houston game at Oklahoma. That was the Alamo Bowl. Now, that Alamo Bowl, you had the second and third quarter that was a lot of good that Jackson Arnold could take out of it, and then the first and fourth quarters that were pretty bad. He then had an entire offseason, and the question all offseason was kind of, how's he going to respond? How's he going to develop? Though the offensive line wasn't perfect against Temple, I thought he responded really, really well. A lot of the bad, I think, on Saturday against Houston was ultimately on Jackson Arnold. That doesn't mean he's done as a quarterback or anything crazy like that. It was his third start, for heaven's sakes. But I do think, Randall, this is a huge week. We're going to find out a lot about the mental makeup of Jackson Arnold, of how quickly can he turn around a bad performance into whatever the response will be against Tulane on a 7-day turnaround.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And I think a big part of that that will probably help Jackson Arnold is having an offensive coordinator who's been a head coach before. He knows how to deal with the personalities that come with coaching a football team. He knows how to handle, the quarterback, that being the main guy on the team. So I think that helps Jackson Arnold. But like you said, a lot of it comes down to him. And can he step onto the field against Tulane? I apologize. Too many teams in the first 4 weeks of the season. Can he step on the field against Tulane and say, okay, last week is last week. I'm going to go make up for it right now. Because, you hear this all the time from baseball players, basketball players, but it goes for any sport. You have to have a, last play, next play mentality. Can't dwell in the past. You just have to move forward. And so I think for Jackson Arnold, that'll be really important. I think that if you're Seth Luttrell, you probably show him some of the highlight plays he made last week. Those 2 big throws to Jake Roberts, some of those plays where OU's moving the ball down the field. That one, though, I guess the one drive where you moved the ball down the field, show him, say, look, this is what it looks like when we're getting in rhythm. We just need to capitalize on that. Use these plays, build your confidence, build off that. And if Seth Luttrell can open Jackson Arnold's eyes to that, and if Jackson Arnold can see that and believe in himself coming into the week, I think that'll be a big improvement for him. But again, I think a lot of what we draw from it will depend on how he plays against Tulane, because like you said, if it's another bad game, then maybe it's, I don't want to say snowballing, or not, I didn't want to say spiraling. Snowballing, I guess, is the word that I'm looking for. Maybe it's, one thing after another.
Brian, you asked earlier about my game review, and I wrote down a couple of notes about the offensive line. I wanted to go over those real quick in the context of what Seth Luttrell faces as the offensive coordinator. So here are just a couple of little notes as I was watching the game. Tarquin good, Fabechi hot and cold. Bates was better before he lost his mind, obviously. Taylor, not healthy, still young. Gabe Eichert, I think, on the Oklahoma Breakdown podcast, said Taylor had his 3rd injury, experienced a new injury on Saturday against Houston.
Yeah, that was the blow ribs. I was talking with Eddie. Rand, I don't know if you saw this, but Eddie and I were talking, and he said it looked like he's obviously not diagnosing a massive rib injury, but he took a big shot to the midsection, and he was kind of healed over, which it sounds like he's already had some leg injuries that he was dealing with during camp.
I wrote down, among the other things that I wrote down in my notes, Sexton looked fine, but he did struggle at times. Randall, just piggybacks off what you said earlier. He's a tackle, not a guard. That was my note from Sunday when I'm rewatching the game. He's a tackle, not a guard. Logan Howland, left tackle. That was my assessment of him. He played left tackle. Didn't do great. So Jackson Arnold now as the quarterback, he doesn't have all his weapons at receiver. He's got that to deal with up front as an offensive line. And let me just remind everybody, Seth Luttrell. I thought Seth Luttrell was a fantastic hire. I advocated for Seth Luttrell when he was the offensive analyst, sat out for that year, got fired at North Texas and then brought in by Brent to be the analyst. I thought there was a natural hire. I thought he was a great hire. His accomplishments as an offensive coordinator speak for themselves. That wasn't necessarily his offense at North Texas, okay? He brought in Graham Harrell, right? Former Tech quarterback, gifted offensive coordinator. He brought in Graham Harrell to run a version of the offense that he learned under Larry Fedora and Mark Mangino and Kevin Wilson and so on and so forth. So this is his offense, but it's been, guys, 8 years since he was the play caller. He was the head coach for 7 years. He sat out a year as an analyst. It's been 8 years since he was the play caller. So it's Seth, too, who's a little rusty as a play caller, I think. And here's some more notes that I wrote down that you guys will enjoy from my assessment of Seth as a play caller Saturday night against Houston. No identity, no consistency. They had 14 points on their first, I think, 3 drives, 0 points on their last 8 drives. There's no tempo. There's none of that Baylor offense, sideline to sideline, outside the numbers, deadly. We got to defend every inch of the offense of the field because this team does this on offense. There's no power run game, not for the most part. There's a couple of plays here and there. But think back to those Art Briles Baylor offenses where you're seeing gaps open up. You're seeing running backs hit the hole, and it's 8 yards a pop. We haven't seen that. We haven't seen that north-south vertical run game. There's no deep ball, as I mentioned earlier. There's been no through 2 games deep ball. It's not the spread. It's not Baylor's offense. It's not even North Texas's offense, guys, or North Carolina's offense. from my assessment, the last two games, the only play that Jackson Arnold has consistently run that produces consistent results is a play action pass, is a standard operating procedure, play action pass, fake the run, throw it to the tight end, over the middle, wide open, touchdown. But even a couple of those throws have been off. If you think about it, Jake Roberts last week had to make two really good catches to pull those in. So there's just no offensive identity with what Seth is doing, and I think there's a concern. I think there's a lot to build on, and I think he's got some talented players. But as those guys get back from injury, as that talent develops, as Seth gets his kind of play calling feet back under him, things will improve. But guys, it's going to take a while.
Who do you think part of that could be that? I mean, I'm not going to use the word vanilla, but do you think part of that could be that Oklahoma hasn't had the full playbook out in these first few games? Because I've noticed that I don't think I've seen Oklahoma run a counter once in these first few games, which
That's right.
That's a very basic run concept. I feel like every offensive playbook has some version of a counter in it. I mean, in high school, we ran like 3 different variations of counter, and I haven't seen Oklahoma run that play once in 2 weeks.
Agreed.
So maybe that's something that, that and the fact that also we heard about how great Taylor Tatum was in the past game. We haven't seen a ball thrown to him yet.
Right.
Those two things make me think maybe there are some plays that Oklahoma hasn't shown yet, but I don't think that you can be necessarily relying on those plays to save the offense. I just think that maybe Seth Luttrell hasn't been playing with the full deck yet. But I don't know. It's really hard to tell until we get into later.
What you're saying is right, Randall. But at the same time, the plays that they've worked on, the plays that they've repped in practice, the plays that they've said, okay, we're going to keep it vanilla and we're going to do this, they're not doing them very well at all. That's the problem.
Well, Taylor Tatum also tried to get Jackson Arnold murdered in pass protection, which, as we know, with DeMarco Murray back, Taylor Tatum will not touch the field if Jackson Arnold loses his life at the hands of a backside blitz that Tatum didn't break out. So I think the biggest thing, which this is ultimately, it goes back to, this is on Seth Luttrell and it's on Bill Beanbo. So this is not an excuse. I don't know how you call an offense if you don't know where the deficiency is going to come from every play. And I've said this a bunch. This goes back to Hoove. You and I have both worked with Sam Mays, but Sam would tell me all the time, if your left guard sucks and you know he sucks, there's stuff you can do. It's what Oklahoma State has had to do in the past. That this group is pretty good, but in 3 or 4 years in the past, they've had to scheme around. That's why the Cowboy back became a thing, because they just knew there are deficiencies at X spot. Right now, Oklahoma, from play to play, they don't know if one play Jackson Arnold's going to make the wrong read on an RPO. The next play, Bates and Fabechi are not going to communicate and someone's splitting the guard in the center. Then the next play, Fabechi and Spencer Brown miscommunicate on how wide Spencer Brown's going to set. And so then Spencer Brown looks like he gets torched in pass protection. Then the next play, Bauer Sharp's not blocking back and sealing his guy when they try to run a split. So how do you call an offense when you don't even know play to play? That's why they have no identity, because no one can even give them consistency and execution. They don't know who's going to screw up every single play. So I don't know what to do there, and that's what they get paid the big bucks to get kind of figured out here. So, boys, I do have a big picture question. There have been a couple of OU teams thrown around that this group is being compared to through 2 weeks. I want to ask you about those. But first, let's read the vibes. We talked a lot about what was said this week. Anything else that stuck out? I know that there's one thing, Hoove, that you and I talked about. Hoove, next week, Oklahoma plays Tennessee. That means that next Wednesday, we will get our first ever Oklahoma SEC availability report. How is Oklahoma going to give an accurate availability report when Bill Beanbo and Seth Luttrell and Brent Venables get the readout from the trainers every single day and go, what the hell does hopeful mean?
Yeah. It was kind of revealing and a little bit funny, of course, yesterday. Tuesday, when Brent Venables said he was asked about Branson Hickman, and he's like, he's a little better, but we'll see. And everybody's, all of us in the media, right, in the press conference, we're rolling our eyes. Here we go again. And he goes, I'm literally not being evasive. I don't know. We're hopeful. We really are, but we could use a guy that started 35 games in his career. He wants him in there. Not a popular answer, Brent said. He said, but it's not popular in our offices. I can promise you that. Try being the trainer that comes in, and I love this, and the athletic trainer that comes in with the injury report, He's Dr. Death, Brent says, giving us the report every day. And he gets challenged pretty good. What does that mean? Is he going today? Is he going to be available to practice this week? They don't know either. So if anybody's this frustrated, Brent says, as far as who's going to be available this week, you got to get in line because the coaches and even the athletic trainers are frustrated as well.
Yeah, it's not good. It's hashtag not good. Something that has been hashtag good, though, is the defense. We've railed for almost 45 minutes. I haven't said 2 words about them. Imagine that. The Oklahoma defense of old would have prayed for us to talk 45 minutes and never say a word there. There was defensive talk a little bit, Randall, on Tuesday.
Yeah, I mean, Brent Venables talked a lot about how the growth of a lot of the defensive guys, specifically he mentioned Grayson Halton, he mentioned Kobe McKenzie. We talked to Grayson Halton on, was it Monday night? And so I think, to hear from Brent's perspective and from Grayson's perspective about the growth that he's had was really interesting. Brent Venables said, that's a guy who couldn't even get onto the field last year, and now he's SEC defensive lineman of the week. And I think through the first 2 games, you've seen him really show that leap that he took over the offseason. I think that what he said specifically was that the turning point for him was in that Alamo Bowl. He said that, he was sick, having to watch his teammates play against Arizona when he felt that he could have really helped the team, but that he wasn't able to. He said that really, really sat in his mind, and that drove him all offseason to fix those mistakes, to improve. And he said that working with Jerry Schmidt over the offseason was a big part of that. He credited Todd Bates, saying Todd Bates tells him, hey, adversity is going to hit. That's life, but you have to run towards it. You can't run away from it. And so, I think hearing from Grayson Hall, I think one of the coolest parts about being in the media is getting to see at a college is getting to see these guys come in as young kids and then grow into, really good football players and people. And I think it's cool that we've seen that with Grayson Halton. Last year, a guy that we talked to sparingly, and now I think you can tell that he's grown up a lot personally and as a football player. I think Brent Venables agrees. I think if we were able to talk to Todd Bates would probably agree. That's why Grayson Halton is playing so much significant time. It feels like he's one of the main guys in that defensive front getting snaps. And I think that makes it even more impressive because, we talk about there's injuries all over the team, right? That defensive front, especially on the interior, that's one area where there's not been many injuries and there is a lot of depth. Yet despite that, Grayson Halton has played his way to the top of that group. And he's even, made more of a splash in these first 2 weeks than a guy like Dominic Williams, who was the big name transfer that came in over the offseason. A guy like Jaden Jackson, who is, the story of week 1, starting as a true freshman. Even David Stone, a 5-star prospect. Grayson Halton has set himself apart and really, made a name for himself in these first 2 weeks. I think that, Brent Venables, again, the way he praised him in his improvement over the offseason, I think that's really encouraging for Oklahoma's defensive front. I think that we're going to see continued success this season from Grayson Halton. I don't expect that to slow down anytime soon.
Yeah, real quick note on Grayson, guys. He's the number 2 graded overall defensive player by Pro Football Focus, behind Robert Spears Jennings on the defense with Danny Stutzman and Billy Bowman and so on and so forth. Returning starters up front, 5-star defensive linemen up front. It's Grayson Halton behind, again, Robert Spears Jennings, who is those are the 2 highest graded players. So very impressive work by both of those guys.
Yeah, Grayson's been excellent. We can all agree, though, that you and I could have made that safety play, right? That was a monumental just bust. Watching that back on SportsCenter the next day, I was like, I don't think Grayson actually did anything. He did the right thing, which is run forward and obliterate a guy. But yeah. Shout out to Houston for.
I described it as he spiked himself forward. He put his hand on the blocker who was running behind him, and he pushed himself forward into the guy. So that's a pretty good technique.
Technique. It helps to be totally unblocked.
And the running back's also fumbling the ball in his hands too, so he can't get a secure handle on it, which gives Grayson even more time to get back there. But he did the right thing. And even aside from that play, he played really well in that game. He had another play where Donovan Smith kind of fell over, but Grayson Halton was coming. He was bearing down on him real fast there in the backfield. And then obviously if you go back to the Temple game, he was shedding blocks, getting in the backfield there. I think that, you're really going to need continued success from him and the rest of that defensive line group. But the way that he's played it encourages even more. It answers one of the questions you had coming into the season.
Yeah, for sure. Other thing I think that Brent Venables kind of hit on that is just going to be a reality of if this offense gets better is with Jalil Farouk hurt, with Jaden Gibson gone, with Angelo Anthony still on the road to recovery, even though he's cleared from his ACL, clearly not back to being Angelo Anthony. There's a lot of attention being put on some of these really, really young wide receivers, whether that be Zion Raggins coming in, whether that be some guys behind that we didn't really get to see last week in Ivan Carey on Zion Kearney. Just thought it was really interesting. Brent Venables just kind of talked about, like, look, man, it is what it is. You want to get those guys developmental reps, but when Jaden Gibson had been a monster through camp, you basically lost 3 weeks of those developmental reps that were going to Jaden Gibson because he was going to be a huge part of this offense. So you got to hope that Oklahoma continues to get development there. Jaquez Petaway, it sounds like, had a knee injury last week randomly that came on Wednesday. They thought they were going to be without him. Then he played. So Petaway's got to be available in practice. It feels like that's the buzzword of the entire offense, is who is actually available to practice to see if they can get on the field on Saturday. So we shall see. We shall see. All right. I have a big question for you guys before we get on to Tulane and then some other stuff. We have a softball schedule that has dropped, so that always stresses me out mid-podcast. Shout out to that. I've heard a couple of different versions of overreaction through 2 weeks here of what this Oklahoma team is. So maybe I'll just direct this more at Hoove, since he was covering both of these teams. Through 2 weeks, does this team remind you more of the 09 group, which was the living wounded, the walking wounded? It was Oklahoma's last truly elite defense that everyone forgets about because the offense with a redshirt freshman, Landry Jones, who was trying to figure out life when he wasn't prepared for it, unlike Jackson coming in. Or does this remind you more of a 2005 team that kind of sputtered early because they were just having to flat out live with the growing pains of Rhett Bomar as a true freshman? That group was a lot different by the end of the year, boss, than they were when they lost to TCU in the opener or stuff like that. But I'm just kind of curious because I've seen those comparisons a lot here from the fan base this week.
I think, actually, Ryan, that's a good question. Both of those comparisons are on the money, but for different reasons. 2009, you lost your All-American quarterback, your Heisman quarterback. You lost your All-American tight end. You lost, at some point, your All-American and all-time NFL left tackle. Trent Williams went down later in that season. Brody Eldridge went down. That was similar to me to this season because you had an elite defense, and I think Oklahoma's defense this year, not on that level. There's no Gerald McCoy yet on this defense, but that was, as you said, OU's last elite defense, 2009, and they couldn't do anything. They lost 5 games, and they lost 4 of those games by 1 score or less because Landry Jones and that rebuilt offense, they just couldn't get out of their own way early in the season. So, and then oddly enough, they go to Lubbock, Texas, and got blown out. It was their only blowout loss of the season, but they go on the road to Lubbock and got beat, and it was just like, what is happening here? Really strange. The 2005 team, the similarities are that you had a 5-star quarterback coming in. Okay, Rhett Bomar was a redshirt freshman. Jackson Arnold this year should have been a redshirt freshman, but it's second year, sophomore year, and he is playing uneven. Rhett Bomar was early, especially in that season, playing very uneven. I think Rhett finished with 10 touchdowns and 10 interceptions, so that's about as uneven as you can get. But Jackson is doing some of the same thing. I want to say 4 of that. Yeah, it was the left tackle, the left guard, the right tackle, and the center all went to the NFL that year. Or Vince Carter actually, called it quits after so many knee injuries. But they rebuilt that entire offensive line as well. And so Bomar was coming in 2005, kind of like Jackson is right now, behind an entirely rebuilt offensive line. And, they had Adrian Peterson back, but then he got hurt, I think, the 3rd game. It just was not good. So there's some comparisons that absolutely fit. And then there's some other comparisons, like that 2005 defense wasn't real good until the end of the season. So they were good, but not like great. And they certainly weren't elite. But I think you're right on, man. I think there's some comparisons to 2009 and 2005 throughout this team.
With that being said, Randall, maybe this is overly simplistic and it lacks all the context to just be like, give me a point total. But when you look at some of our talks in the preseason, I think that after 2 weeks, I think the fan base, if I said, would you take 9-3 right now, they would take it and sprint and run and hide and say, dear God, yes. What do you think Oklahoma's going to need to do points per game wise? This offense, how good do they have to be to get Oklahoma to that 9-3-ish territory with this defense? To put this in perspective, there's 133 teams in college football, right? Last year, if you look at about 60 in points per game, that was Colorado. They got about 28 points per game. So are they going to have to be a top half offense in points per game, or can this defense carry them farther even if they're sputtering?
I think that just because of the teams that you're going to play on your schedule, you will have to have if you want to be 9-3, you're going to have to be in the top half on that offensive chart. I mean, the defense can play well against Tennessee and still give up 28 points, right? And so if Oklahoma can't score that much, then they'll lose, even if the defense plays well. And that's not just Tennessee, that's Alabama. LSU might not be we don't really know exactly how strong they are after losing at USC in week 1, but still. They recruit well. They do have talented players on that team. They could put it together and they could become a good offense too. Missouri obviously looks really strong right now. So, I mean, even South Carolina just drummed Kentucky last week. Their offense put up over 30 points. So I think that regardless of how good the defense is, just given some of the offenses that you'll have to play, if you want to win more than 3 games or more than 9 games, I apologize. If you want to win more than 9 games or get to that 9-win mark, you're going to have to put up at least 28 a game, I would assume. Again, just given the strength of the schedule that you're going to play in the SEC, it's not like this is the SEC of old where 3 yards in a cloud of dust, it's all defense, stalemate a whole game. A lot of these offenses can really turn it up now too. And I think that Oklahoma is going to have to follow suit, even if their defense is good, because all these other teams that they're going to play, a lot of them have good defenses too, to go along with really dangerous offenses.
Can I raise one more red flag?
Sure.
Okay. And I feel better about this because, again, I watched the Oklahoma Breakdown podcast, and both of those guys who played for OU and know their stuff and are experts in their field and are also admittedly homers. They love their Sooners, and they should. They both said the same thing that I'm getting ready to say. So I feel much better about saying this. The big losers last week, to me, were the officials. That opening punt did not touch Muse, the punt returner, did not touch his hand. You can see multiple angles. The football went by his hand, did not change directions. There was this much space between his hand. There was a foot between his hand and the football, but it was called a certain way. They couldn't find an angle to overturn it. And so that was 7 free points for Oklahoma. I thought also the safety, when you look at the replay, the ball has cleared. He actually gets hit in the field of play and carried back into the backfield. The ball actually got out of the ball actually got out of the end zone before he was hit. So that's 2 free points for Oklahoma. I thought that they look at the replay and they can't determine, and that was the call. And everybody's screaming at me, shut the hell up, Hoover. You don't know what you're talking about. You're wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong. That may be the case. I'm not wrong. I'm right. But the other side is Tulane got free points got 7 free points after the Woody Washington one-handed interception, because on the next play they scored again. They go back up against a disheveled Oklahoma defense. They throw it deep and they catch the Sooners napping, busted coverage. That play should have never happened. So the touchdown that they scored should have never happened. OU's first touchdown should have never happened. And OU safety, kind of a coin toss, but probably should have never happened. The final score of that game should have been like 7-6. So the officials were the big losers in that game.
You can take Oklahoma out of the Big 12, but you can't take awful Big 12 refereeing decisions out of Oklahoma. Actually, no, it should be SEC crews the rest of the way. Yeah. Rejoice, as maybe it'll be an American crew. I don't know. Tulane's a former SEC program. Maybe they'll just be like, yeah, as soon as the SEC refs. Who cares? Hey, guys, coming into the year, a line I used a lot, a very popular sentiment. Oklahoma had 12 quarters to figure life out and get ready for Tennessee. I would like to make an amendment to that. Oklahoma had 8 quarters to get ready for Tulane, because if they play like they did last Saturday, this Saturday, they're going to get beat. Yeah. Tulane, they gave another really strong showing last weekend against Kansas State. I know that there was some weird OPI stuff on that last play thrown into the end zone. I still think that Kansas State outplayed Tulane over the 4 quarters, but You saw whether it be Darian Mensah, the redshirt freshman quarterback that's kind of come out of nowhere. He was given a really, really fun performance, whether it be Mario Williams, who looks like he's finally found a home in college football after stops in Norman and at USC, or a defense that was good enough early to frustrate Kansas State. Kansas State stuck with it, ended up putting up a really nice rushing total, but they're frustrating them early. Who, if Oklahoma doesn't get this thing sorted, or at least to being average offensively this week, they're going to be another dogfight, because Tulane is going to be much different than Temple and Houston in this area. We've not seen anyone truly try to test Oklahoma consistently downfield, and this Tulane offense is not worried about Mensah thrown out all over the place, even though he's a redshirt freshman making his first true road start.
Yeah, just go back to 2021 when some of these guys, there's not a lot of guys left over from that field, from that team. But Tulane came in here on that Hurricane game, and they were fearless, and they got an onside kick at the end of the game, and they're trying to drive down. They got stopped on 4th down, or they would have won. They have no reason to be afraid to come into Oklahoma and wilt, right? That's not going to happen. If it happens, it's going to be because Oklahoma's gotten healthy at certain positions. Oklahoma's made improvements at certain positions, and Oklahoma's going to have a better roster, more talent, all that stuff. That's the only way it's going to happen, because I don't think Tulane's going to come in here and be afraid. Mario Williams is averaging 125 yards a game. He's averaging 27 yards a catch. Mensah is fearless throwing the football, and I love his name too, Mensah. He needs to play for Tom Herman. What a pairing.
He does not. We don't want to ruin the poor kid.
Good point. And they held a 10-point lead at halftime. I was listening to that game on the satellite radio against K-State. So, yeah, man. OU is a 13-point favorite. I don't see it. I don't see OU covering 2 touchdowns against this Tulane team. Not in the state that Oklahoma's currently playing.
Yeah, Randall, what's the thing about this Tulane team that stresses you out? Is it the fact that the defense can actually get legitimately tested? Because I thought the most impressive part about Saturday was a defense that traditionally has heaped too much pressure on itself, knowing that it's not usually a great unit, stayed cool, calm, collected. They rebounded after that bust, even though they were frustrated from Woody, who should have got the interception. Is it that side of things, or is it circling straight back to we've talked all offense and it's going to be the Tulane D-line against this Oklahoma O-line?
I think the two kind of go hand in hand, honestly, because if Oklahoma's offense can't get anything going and you're continuously putting the defense out on the field, the way that Tulane is going to test you deep, those defensive backs will get tired. I mean, that's how it's going to be when you're running deep every single play, right? So especially if your defense is on the field a lot, that's going to be a concern, especially like you mentioned. Houston did not attack down the field like that. Sure, Donovan Smith completed 24 passes or something like that, but I mean, it felt like every single one of those was within 7 yards of the line of scrimmage, or even behind the line of scrimmage.
9 were behind the line of scrimmage. Of that 22 he completed, of the 24 he completed, 9 of 9 were behind the line of scrimmage. And when you extrapolate that out, exactly what you're saying, he went 9 of 9 behind the line of scrimmage, and then he went 7. Gosh, I should have. He threw 12 more passes within 10 yards. So of that, 21 passes were within 10 yards or back.
Right. So Oklahoma's defense is playing with a lot of that in front of them. It's honestly, the defensive backs obviously are making a lot of those plays, but that goes to the linebackers and things like that too. Now this is completely different. You're going to be testing those safeties, those cornerbacks deep every play. They're going to have to be in the right positions. Can't have some of those coverage busts that you saw against Houston. You're going to have to, that depth is going to have to really show out in this game. Because like I said, when you're running deep every play, those guys are going to get tired. They're going to get gassed a lot easier than they would when you're throwing stuff underneath and you're letting them come up and attack, right? This time Tulane is attacking deep rather than letting Oklahoma's defense come up and attack the shallow stuff. On offense, I think what's concerning for Oklahoma is that you mentioned what Kansas State was able to do to get back into the game was running the ball. They racked up some good rushing yards. Obviously, they've got a good running quarterback there at Kansas State. But I mean, that's on offense what has been Oklahoma's biggest struggle is running the football. So if that's what it took for Kansas State, that was the weak point of Tulane's defense. If that's not Oklahoma's strength, if they can't capitalize on that, that's going to be a problem. If Tulane is able to play well against the pass, it might be a struggle for Oklahoma to be able to keep their offense out on the field if they can't get the running game going. Maybe Tulane's defense is soft enough against the run that OU is able to get that run game going, but If OU struggled to run the ball against Temple, we'll see what it looks like against Tulane.
Yeah, if they struggle to run the ball, I need to see Seth Luttrell get back to his air raid roots. And it's the old adage that Mike Leach would always talk about, right? Yes, I'm not handing the ball off, but if I'm dumping it off to a receiver within half a second in the flats behind the line of scrimmage, it's basically a run play. It looks different, all that stuff. I think you need to see a lot of that quickly. I think a lot of that has to do with, though, does Nick Anderson continue to progress like Brent Venables said he was progressing on Wednesday on the teleconference? If he does, you've got a bigger body receiver out there that can block. You've got tight ends, all that stuff. If not, we shall see. I'm really fascinated, too. Jackson Arnold didn't make any real bad decisions as far as putting the ball in harm's way against Temple. He had the one pick against Houston, but it was an arm punt, essentially. Oklahoma is winning the field position battle. They're number one right now in the country in field position. That's going to be really important in SEC play because you talk about it. Here's the difference, right? If Oklahoma punts and Luke Elzinga puts Tennessee inside the 20 a week from now, and Tennessee gets 2 first downs, they're still punting it back, no harm, no foul. If Jackson Arnold turns the ball over on his own 40 and Tennessee gets 2 first downs, they put 3 points on the board, even if they're not able to get into the end zone. I don't think you're as concerned with that this week against Tulane, but I am really interested to see what is Jackson Arnold, how's he going to respond now? There's been more pressure, a whole week of criticism put on him. Does that mean he's forcing it, or does he make good decisions? Then the flip side of that is Oklahoma's defense has been really good at turning the ball over. Mensah had a pretty bad interception going into the end zone against K-State, but he was at home and it wasn't a packed house. It's going to be a totally different atmosphere this weekend. I'm fascinated to see how Mensah handles that, because that is something, a big unknown. As much as there's unknown about Oklahoma's offense, I think that's unknown about Mensah, and I think to a certain extent that's going to be unknown about Nico next week, even though he's got an offensive line that's going to help him out. So pretty interesting indeed. Hey, let's hit around the league real quick. I know we're running a little bit long today, but I think it's deserving. By the way, if you didn't watch Tennessee and what they did to NC State, understandably, you're in the stadium or anything like that, here's the too long didn't read. NC State tried to shorten the game with their run game. They threw one bad interception, turned into a pick six, and then Tennessee did what good teams do, which is they took that momentum and they ran with it. They piled it on. They could have named their score. They shut that thing down in the second half. That's not good. What did we learn last week about Tennessee? Yeah, it wasn't just that they were playing Chattanooga. Experienced offensive line, plus Nico, plus a badass defensive line. They're going to be good. I'm really fascinated, though. I think we're going to learn a lot more about the rest of the conference this week when it comes to Boston College headed to Missouri. What does Bill O'Brien have for Eli Drinkwitz in that group? You got LSU, South Carolina. LSU, who bounced back, was really, really shady against Nichols in the first half. What do they look like? South Carolina, who just revealed to everyone that Brock Vandagriff can't run or can't throw the ball. He went, 3 of 10 or whatever. I think that's going to be pretty interesting. Alabama struggled. They're headed on the road to Wisconsin. That's one that Oklahoma fans should be monitoring just to see, was that just that South Florida has Alabama's number for 2.5 quarters, or are there some bigger problems there with Kalen DeBoer? It is kind of fun, Hoove, that we're in week 3, and though there's only the one conference matchup between LSU and South Carolina, I do think we will actually learn some stuff this week about some of Oklahoma's future opponents on this schedule.
I'm just working on Iamaliava. Can I get that out every time? I think that's right. Is that right? Iamaliava?
I'm going to go straight to it. I'm going to be like, I can say Tagovailoa now. It took me 2.5 years, and I just went with Tua. Hey, you know what? Thus far, Nico's good enough to be known by one name, and that's Nico. A good thing.
That's right. His name is not Joe or Josh or Tom or Tim, it's Nico, and that is a hell of a first name. Let's go with that. Tennessee quarterback Nico. Yeah. Now listen, South Carolina stuffed it down Kentucky's throat last week. That surprised the heck out of me. And all of a sudden, you look at that game that coming up in Norman. South Carolina's coming to Norman. That was one that we all put down as an automatic dub. South Carolina showed Kentucky a thing or two, and Kentucky was supposed to be that, hey, maybe this is the year they take that next step. Well, no, that's apparently not going to happen. So I'll be interested to see how good South Carolina is this week against LSU.
I'm really interested to see. You mentioned. I think South Carolina LSU is really interesting because, of course, it's 2 opponents that Oklahoma will play. And after last week, what South Carolina did, let's see it again. Is it real, or is that just because Kentucky's not as good as we thought? I think Alabama Wisconsin is a really fascinating game because all offseason I said that I thought that Jalen Milroe would be a lot better this season. I thought that he would really be a problem for Oklahoma's defense. Well, Wisconsin's defense is going to be a much bigger test for Alabama and Jalen Milroe than the first two teams that the Crimson Tide played. So how does he perform against that Wisconsin defense? Of course, it'll be interesting to see Tawi Walker in the Wisconsin backfield against that Alabama defense. See how that looks. But I'm really interested to see what Jalen Milroe looks like against a more stout defense, and I think that'll really be telling for whenever Alabama comes to Norman later in the year. Obviously, down the road, there's time for improvement if he doesn't look good. But I still think that it'll be an interesting first test for them.
Yeah, I think the big thing with Alabama, though, I'm stoked for this game, but the biggest question I have for them right now is depth in that receiving core behind Ryan Williams. I think that by the time week 11 rolls around, when the Crimson Tide are in Norman, I'm not sure how much what we'll see this weekend will end up applying, if that makes sense, because I think these teams are going to be so different by then. Same thing with like Oklahoma's offensive line, but it is an early marker, so I'm pretty excited to see it. All right, the thing that's been stressing me out all podcast, Oklahoma softball did get to announce their SEC schedule. We're going to hit that real quick. You know me, we weren't getting out of here without it. It's just the SEC schedule. Here it be. They're going to open first series in Norman against South Carolina. Then it'll be 2 straight weekends on the road. They're going to head to Arkansas, then head to Missouri. The beautiful thing is that Arkansas series comes during the weekend, I think, of the Big 12 basketball tournament. So this is just for you to know, Hoove. I'll probably be in Fayetteville and then be able to cycle back around as the Sooner women hit the road that next weekend. When Oklahoma softball takes on Missouri, that'll be the opening weekend of the NCAA tournament for the Sooner women. Then Oklahoma will be back. So March 28th through 30th. Circle this one. The South Carolina series is your first SEC series. Oklahoma gets Tennessee March 28th, March 29th, March 30th at Love's Field. Then they head to Alabama 2 weekends later. Looks like there's a little bye week that first weekend of April. So the 12th through the 14th, the series will be in Tuscaloosa. Then they'll host Mississippi State that next weekend, April 18th through the 20th. So mark your calendars now. Texas, April 25th through 27th. That'll be good. May 1st through the 3rd, Oklahoma will close with Florida. That'll be a top 5 series. Texas will probably be the number 1 team in the country when they come into Norman on April 25th through the 27th as well. Then May 6th through the 10th, it'll be the SEC tournament hosted by Georgia this year in Athens. So your home schedule, South Carolina, Tennessee, Mississippi State, Texas. The road slate, Arkansas, Missouri, Alabama, Florida. Gentlemen, that's a damn schedule. There are no Iowa States. There are no Kansas weekends on this.
For sure. So Patty Gasso said the SEC is a different animal. This is what she's talking about. When they schedule OU to play Texas and Florida on the final 2 weeks of the season, they're like, welcome, Oklahoma, to the SEC. Let's see if you can do this. You're badass, and you've won 4 straight national titles, but let's see if you can do this. So that's going to be fun. That's a heck of a schedule, and that's going to be a heck of a finish for OU.
Sounds like you're in for a trip to the Atlanta area for SEC championships as well, Ryan.
Yep. Yeah, I'm sorry, Hoove. I'm going to Athens, and a little part of me thinks I may be making a trip out to Clearwater. The whole schedule hasn't been announced yet. That would obviously be a non-conference situation, but we'll see if I get that approved from the powers that. Yeah. We'll see this.
Tournament is May 6th through 10th. I've never been to Athens. Okay, the 2 years that I did cover the SEC, Georgia was not on the schedule, so I may have to join you.
More the merrier. I'm just telling you, we're probably the good times will be had in Atlanta, which will happen multiple times. This is the best part about going to the SEC for me is I just get to write off all these trips to Atlanta. And who's like, you're an insane person? Like, yeah, I don't care. Sue me, whatever. So. All right. Anything else we got, guys? Randall, is there anything on the recruiting front? I know that Booby Feaster was around. The man, the myth, the legend. We have Cortez Mills drama. What's the big runoff of Oklahoma wide receiver recruiting, coming up this past weekend?
Well, obviously, I wrote this. Sorry, couldn't talk there. I wrote the story about Cortez Mills planning to visit Nebraska last week. I think there were some other reports saying, hey, let's just see if he actually takes the visit. He took the visit, and it seemed like he had a really good time. I think there was a few videos circulating Twitter of him kind of enjoying the atmosphere when Nebraska just drummed Colorado last Saturday with some other recruits. I know an Alabama commit was in there. Obviously, a bunch of Nebraska recruits were there too. I have talked to some people on the Nebraska side that seem pretty optimistic about the way things are heading. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean anything. And Cortez Mills hasn't announced anything. He's still committed to Oklahoma. So I don't think that there's any reason to, panic or raise alarm yet. I think that Emmett Jones is still, doing all that he can to keep that relationship strong. But I do think that it's telling that, instead of coming to Norman all the way from Florida, Cortez Mills elected to go to Nebraska. He did say that he wants to get back out to Norman. He wants to get to LSU also. So I think that this is just a situation to monitor for now is what I would say with Cortez Mills. Obviously, don't overreact. Don't assume anything until you see it. But I think that that right now OU is still fighting, I would say. He is committed, obviously, but I think that OU is still fighting to keep him now.
Do we have any clarification on? So obviously Brent Venables talked about the rule when he came in, as far as if you commit to Oklahoma and you take other visits, we're not going to consider you as committed. So does that mean that Oklahoma does not consider Cortez Mills as a commit? They're still recruiting him. They're just not going to hold his spot. What do we know how all of that works, seeing as it's a very high profile guy that's taking a visit?
It seems like from what I've gathered from other, recruits is that maybe Oklahoma is a little more lax on that, understanding kind of that it's hard to operate that way in modern college football. Obviously, if we see Cortez Mills decommit soon, then maybe that'll be a little more of a telling answer. Obviously, it won't tell us the whole truth because maybe Nebraska just won him over in the end. But I think that it is an interesting case. I think that again, it's a situation to monitor without a doubt, and I think that what happens here will be telling with how Brent Venables and company handle that moving forward. Again, it's not something that we've seen very often. Most of the kids that have committed to OU and Brent Venables haven't really had interest in taking other visits. Even the young guys who have committed that have been a few years out. So I think that's, again, it'll be a very interesting case. It'll kind of test that rule because obviously the last time we saw that happen was Ashton Cozart, and he was no longer in the class afterwards. And so, with Cortez Mills, it'll be interesting to see if it's a repeat of that situation. I do think, again, if you're an OU fan, that you don't necessarily need to worry. Obviously, he's a very, very good prospect. It's not the end of the world if he does pull out of OU's class. Emmett Jones is recruited well. They've got a bunch of other talented receivers in that class. They're still recruiting other talented receivers as well. So I think that they want Cortez Mills. I think that they're going to continue to try to keep him in that class. I think that, again, but I will say another recruit that was there for Nebraska last weekend was Christian Jones, 4-star linebacker from Omaha. Carl Albert. I think that with Danny Stutzman heading off to the NFL next year, you're probably going to have guys in that room transfer. You'd like to get some new depth in there, just so you're not facing the same problems that you're facing on the offensive side of the ball this year. I think Christian Jones was one of Oklahoma's main targets at linebacker. Again, he committed to Nebraska this week after visiting Nebraska last weekend. Obviously, it's always going to be hard for Oklahoma to go into Nebraska, especially Omaha, and pull out a recruit away from the Cornhuskers, especially when it seems like right now Nebraska's kind of in the middle of a resurgence right now, at least in popularity. The fan base was there. They were rowdy. They had 2 huge wins to start the year. They're hot on the recruiting trail again. Matt Rule obviously has had success in college football. So I think that the way that things are trending with Nebraska, it was going to be hard for Oklahoma to pull Christian Jones away. But it is still a big loss. He was a top 100 prospect, a guy that Oklahoma was in on, that he took an official visit to OU over the summer. They miss out there. I think that Oklahoma's probably going to have to still look for a linebacker in that 2025 class because, again, you want to add some depth to that room. I don't know that there's anyone specifically on the board right now that I would say this guy's close. Obviously, Elijah Melendez decommitted from Miami recently. I think that Auburn is probably the main team to watch there with him. I know OU was interested, but it seems like Auburn's probably going to win out in that recruitment. So I think Oklahoma is still maybe looking for some answers in the 2025 linebacker spot. In that class, I think that's probably the last spot that they really, really need to fill. Of course, they'll take some other guys if you can get them, but I think the linebacker room is really where you need to try to add one more guy if you can.
Yeah,
what's interesting? I'm sorry, Ryan. I'll just interject real quick. What's interesting to me about Cortez Mills is Brent took an unpopular and early in his career unpopular stance, hardline stance about you go visit somewhere else. You're no longer committed. We're cutting you loose. Someone else in Brent Venables' life, one of his mentors, has taken a hardline stance about the transfer portal and it has blown up in Dabo Swinney's face. So I wonder if Brent sees that kind of, this is who we are. This is our identity. This is the foundation upon which we build our morals and our the whole thing. And maybe Brent's looking at that going, wow, that didn't really work for Dabo. Maybe I shouldn't take such a hardline stance on some things. If this is what you said, Randall, is true, if he's kind of relaxing that a little bit in Cortez Mills' case, maybe that's Brent Venables evolving as a head coach quickly.
Hoover, I think that's exactly what it is. I think you learn from the Ashton Cozart situation. You spend a few more years as a head coach and realize this is a nice idea, but it's kind of hard in practice, obviously, especially when you're dealing with elite prospects, right? Those top guys, it's hard to, maybe this is not the best term to use, but it's hard to boss them around and control them like that, right? To say, you can't take those visits. You're only committed to Oklahoma.
Right.
And when you do that, you risk losing some of those top guys. And I think that obviously, like we've mentioned, part of that comes from the top, Brent Venables, realizing that. I think part of that also is Emmett Jones, and Emmett Jones not wanting to burn relationships. And so him coming to Brent and kind of saying, look, I know your rule, but let me take the lead on this. Let me handle this. We don't want to burn this relationship, not only with the kid, but with the coaching staff, things like that. Again, Emmett Jones is a guy who was a high school head coach. So he's really, really, really good at building those relationships with high school head coaches. And he knows how to nurture and maintain those relationships. And so I would say that also it's partially him going to Brent and saying, look, we don't want to ruin any relationships, especially in the state of Florida, which is one of OU's main recruiting grounds. So let's not jump to any conclusions. Let's not do anything reactionary. Let's just wait and see what happens.
We've also seen other aspects of the program where Brent Venables has moved off of maybe some of the stuff that he talked about in that initial spring. You talk about the Dominic Williams recruitment. That probably had a lot more to do with NIL negotiating. At the very, very end, Dominic Williams obviously wanted to come to Oklahoma, but I don't know if in 2022, Oklahoma gets into the battle with LSU and Texas at the death that they got into. I think you've seen clearly Bill Bedenbaugh's had an uptick in how he recruits the elite of the elite guy. I know that Fasusi wants to come to Oklahoma because of Bill Bedenbaugh, because of that track record. I have to believe that clearly after swinging and missing as many times as Bill Bedenbaugh did with the elite of the elite guys, we talked Caden Green, we talked Michael Fasusi, probably a little bit different NIL conversations that had happened to earn those commitments than maybe when Brent Venables arrived and the hard line that they had set. So I think you've seen that evolution anyway. All right, Randall, last one before we hop out of here. What about the great Ethan Feaster? Do we all need to know? All-time Ethan Booby Feaster. It's the name that catches headlines, but he's got game to back up the name.
Yeah, I mean, this guy is an elite prospect. I mean, you want to talk about the top wide receivers in the country, he's right up there. I think right now he's rated the #1 wide receiver according to 24/7 Sports in that 2027 class. So I know that sounds far off. Those are sophomores in high school right now, but he's the top 10 prospect in the class, #1 receiver in the class. He's about 6'1", 180 pounds right now, which doesn't seem huge, but again, for a sophomore in high school, that's a pretty good size receiver. Just great speed. And the thing that really I've seen him play in person. I got to watch DeSoto win the state championship game last year. The thing that really stands out to me is when he runs routes, how mature he looks out there on the field. You know, a lot of young guys that you see, especially the elite talent guys, those guys with really good athleticism, they're just using their speed. They're just using their size to go out there and just beat up on kids that are not as athletic as them. And Bowie Feaster can certainly do that, but he also shows a lot of maturity playing the position, a lot of the small, minute details that you wouldn't necessarily notice, but that he does a lot of those little things right. I think that's going to really make him relate well with a guy like Emmett Jones, who's such a good technical coach. He wants to really get into those nitty-gritty details. I think that Ethan Feaster kind of, from my understanding, that's kind of what draws those two together. The work and the small things, because of course he's got that elite athleticism. But what takes him to the next level, outside of all these other guys that also have that athleticism, is that he's very mature for a guy who's a 2027 prospect in the way he plays wide receiver, the way he runs routes, the way he's able to release off the line of scrimmage, the way he's able to use his hands to get away from defensive backs, the way he's able to go up and win at the catch point. Those are things that you don't see very often from kids that are that young. He had over 600 yards as a true, high school only has true freshman. He over 600 yards as a freshman at DeSoto High School. I think you know how, if you know Texas high school football, you know how hard it is to even get on the field for DeSoto, let alone be one of their star wide receivers. That's also an offense that really predicated running the ball last year. They've got some older receivers, 4-star guys that also have the, are their number one option right now just because they're a few years older. So for him to be able to be that big a part of an offense as a true freshman, I think that just shows that this is one of the elite prospects in the entire country. If you're familiar with DeCorian Moore out of Duncanville in the 2025 class, number one wide receiver, top 10 prospect, I think Bowie Feaster projects a lot like him, a guy who's big with elite speed and is going to be one of the top wide receivers in the class. Not the exact same player, but just a similar trajectory path as DeCorian Moore.
Have to wonder, the atmosphere was good against Houston. Was the experience good? I don't know. Maybe plenty of room to grow as Oklahoma tries to make that thing happen.
Hey, if nothing else, you can say, look, you can get on the field ASAP.
All these young guys, they all stink. No, that's not what they're saying. It's what we're saying after 1 week of really, really bad offense. All right, gentlemen, all that's left, 2:30, Oklahoma and Tulane. They will get it going. It is the Stripe the Stadium game. So I guess get your crap out to Stripe the Stadium for Tulane. I don't know. You want me to get out my tinfoil hat here as we walk off? I've played a lot of EA college football. I've been fortunate enough to play big time games in Norman as the head coach at Georgia Tech. And there is a new striping that is happening in EA college football. It's a horizontal stripe instead of the vertical stripe, which is weird because schools have to turn that stuff over to EA college football if they want special stuff. We've not seen that yet. So maybe this is the last normal Stripe the Stadium. Maybe they've got something planned for Tennessee. This is no inside information. This is quite literally me taking a video game and recklessly projecting. I'm sure the marketing department is stoked with me right now that I'm doing that. But I don't know. It's the same drill. Students will be in red, even in odd sections, red and white. Do your thing. Should be fun. We'll be there. We'll have the live blog humming. That thing will get going at about noon, 12:30-ish. So be sure you're headed to OklahomaSoonersOnSI.com. And obviously, you've already been going there, right? Because we've got all the content from this week, everything that was said, all the practice videos from Monday night, the post-practice interviews, Brent Venables on Tuesday. That's on OklahomaSoonersOnSI.com, as well as Hoover's YouTube page, John Hoover Media. And while you're there, while you're on the YouTube page, we need you to do a couple of things. It's really huge for us. Can you subscribe to the YouTube page, like the videos, leave a comment if you enjoy, or if you hate the offense, tell us what you hate about it. We don't care. Just leave a comment. And also there's that little bell up here somewhere. I don't actually know where I'm oriented. If you hit that, then every time Hoove publishes a interview or a video or any of that, you're just going to get a notification that the video is there. You don't even have to remember it. It's going to pop up. You can go watch everybody said. That's huge. Is it lets us grow. We can do more cool stuff. If you remember the softball show in the spring, Hoove was only able to let me do that because of you guys. So it helps grow the show. And then if you're listening on the podcast form, go ahead, leave us a 5-star review. That helps us to basically, when people search Oklahoma football, they see our podcast. And like we said, the more listeners, the more stuff we get to do, the more we get to grow, the more content we get to bring to you. So all those things are a big help, as well as follow us on X at Sooners on SI. That's the catch-all. You're going to get everything there, as well as all of Hoove's stuff. That's at John E. Hoover. I'm at _ Ryan Chapman. Randall is at Randall Sweet 5. We got our guy Bryce at McKinnis Bryce, and Dakota is at Dakota Gregory. Follow all that stuff. I know I hate having to do this spiel. I know that you probably all fast forwarded through it, but it does help. It does help a ton. But the next time you'll hear from us, we'll be in the press box. We'll be slightly less delirious because it won't be 2 a.m. Hopefully, dear God, I hope it won't be 2 a.m. as we recap everything from Oklahoma and Tulane, and we finally get to turn the page and look toward Tennessee as Oklahoma opens up the SEC slate in about a week and a half. But for John Hoover, for Randall Sweet, I'm Ryan Chapman. Thanks as always for coming to the Sooners on SI podcast, and we'll talk to you guys Saturday night.